What? What is happening? I couldn't believe my ears. The will stated that all the inheritance was to be given to my husband Ben, and I had no right to it. So my father-in-law was thankful to me. Well, it's unfortunate for Kelly, but we have no choice but to follow the will he declared. Thus the inheritance was passed on to my husband. Once the inheritance was settled, my husband suddenly asked for a divorce. Why are you saying this all of a sudden? Your sister is pregnant. It's my child. I'm going to marry her. He decided to abandon me and live with my sister and their child. In despair, I fell into the abyss. However, doubting the content of the will, I decided to investigate thoroughly. As a result of the investigation, I discovered shocking facts. My husband then kneeled on the floor, begging for forgiveness. But I have no intention of forgiving my husband and sister. They were destined to hit rock bottom. I am Kelly, currently 32 years old. My father was the CEO of a leading company, and I work there. My sister Sarah is a year older than me and has always been popular due to her beautiful and cheerful nature. On the other hand, I have always been uncomfortable with aggressive men and intense emotions, and I had little experience in love. Concerned about me, my best friend Mia invited me out. There's a mixer happening soon. Do you want to come? I'm not really good with that kind of thing. What are you saying? We're already in our late 20s. Let's go. Reluctantly, I was dragged to the mixer where I met Ben, who was 2 years older than me. He worked as a salesperson in a real estate agency. The moment I heard he was a salesperson, I prejudged him to be annoying and overbearing. However, talking to him turned out to be easy because he was sincere and calm, which helped me overcome my discomfort with men. Surprisingly, I found it easy to talk with Ben, and before I knew it, we started dating, and after a year, we got married. Even after our marriage, I continued to work at my father's company. Here, Kelly. This is a box of oranges. Please take them home. Such a large amount. Can I really have them? It's fine. We appreciate kind young people like you. Kelly, you really are great at your job. It's not just because you're the boss's daughter. You're truly amazing. People often praised me and gave me gifts such as fruits. I think this was because my father himself was a very virtuous person. My father always treated me very well. I work hard every day, wanting to be like my father. My father is a figure I admire. Ben and I both worked, and we came home at different times. Therefore, whoever got home earlier would take care of the household chores. Today as well, after working overtime and coming home exhausted, I was greeted by the delicious smell of food on the table. Smells good. Looks delicious. Right? You're always working late. Today I made your favorite roasted chicken. I've also prepared dessert for later. Yay, thank you. My husband was an excellent cook and always prepared lavish homemade meals. No matter how tired I was, his cooking would instantly revive me. Thanks to Ben, I could focus on my work. He was truly invaluable. We were at the peak of happiness, but 2 years ago, a sad event occurred. It was the death of my mother. She was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and it all happened so suddenly. I was quite depressed by my mother's death, and my father felt the same. At work, my father acted bravely, so I didn't notice at first, but one day, when my husband and I visited my parents' house after a long time, it happened. Dad, what's this? What happened? The kitchen sink was piled with dishes, and on the desk, there were leftover containers from convenience store meals. Work has been so busy I don't have the energy to cook, and I keep thinking how delicious Mom's meals were. My father was smiling, but I could tell that his smile was forced. My mother was a homemaker and took care of everything at home. I had never seen my father cook, and it was the first time I saw him so downcast. What are you talking about? You work late every day, and it's understandable that you don't have time for household chores. Plus, Mom was perfect at taking care of the house. But store meals every day. That's worrying. It's not good for your health. It's okay. Sorry to make you worry. As my father began to clean up, his back looked very lonely. Hearing this conversation, Ben spoke up. Dad, if you like, why don't you live with us? Really? I enjoy cooking, and I can get off work by 6 p.m. every day. I also have the option to work from home. It wouldn't be a big change just to add one more person. Ben smiled confidently at my father. I can't impose myself on a newlywed couple. What are you saying? I want a drinking buddy too. Ben. Thank you so much, I'm really happy. Tears were overflowing from my father's eyes. And so, our life together with my father began. After we started living together, I found out that my father used to leave the house at 7 a.m. every day and come home around 10 p.m. Maybe it was because he was the CEO, he had quite a demanding job. For such a father, my husband Ben and I made sure to have dinner ready by the time he returned from work. It's been a while since I had a homemade meal. It's really the best. Delicious. He was in tears as he said that. It seemed my father had become more sensitive. Instead of us cooking, my father started to take care of cleaning and laundry. As my husband promised, he and my father often drank together while watching TV. Perhaps wanting to drink with my husband, my father started to finish work earlier. Before we knew it, my father had regained his smile. Looking back, that might have been the happiest time for me. However, the happiness did not last long. My father began to fall ill frequently, and when we went to the hospital, he was diagnosed with cancer. This can't be. The shock was such that, although I could hear the doctor's voice, it didn't seem to reach my mind. I staggered out of the hospital. Kelly. Kelly. No matter how many times my husband called out to me, I couldn't respond. I was so shocked that I couldn't even feel the ground under my feet. Kelly. Grabbed by the shoulders by my husband, I suddenly came to my senses. Kelly, hold yourself together. If we keep being depressed, it will worry your father. Let's support him together. It's something we couldn't do when your mother was sick. Nodding to my husband's words, I cried all day that day. My father was soon hospitalized, and the company was in chaos without its CEO. To avoid worrying my father about the company, I did my best. When I couldn't visit the hospital due to work, my husband went to see my father alone. However, my father's condition worsened, and he passed away after some time. Holding me as I broke down in tears, my husband consoled me. I'm sure your father is smiling now, meeting your mother he loves so much. Many people from the company and friends attended my father's funeral, and I realized how much he was loved. A few days later, my husband, my sister Sarah, and I gathered at my parents' home to discuss my father's inheritance with a lawyer. There, my husband said, "Actually, I was holding on to a will from your father before he passed away." I didn't know my father had left a will. My father did something like that. "Let's open the will then," said the lawyer, opening it and reading the contents. The will states that all of the estate should be inherited by Ben, the husband of the younger daughter, Kelly. Additionally, the reserved portion should go to the elder sister, Sarah, and the younger daughter, Kelly, shall not inherit. What is happening? I couldn't believe my ears. Why would I not inherit anything? I couldn't believe that my father would leave such a harsh document. Isn't that strange? Contrary to my shock, my husband was not surprised at all. So, my father-in-law was thankful to me. Well, it's unfortunate for Kelly, but we have no choice but to follow the will he declared. The expression on my husband's face was indescribable, something I had never seen before. Kelly, did you perhaps anger your father? Laughed my sister, who had often changed boyfriends and brought them home. My parents were worried and troubled by my sister's behavior. Once my sister graduated from university, she hardly visited home, and when she did, it was always to ask, "Mom, can I have some money?" Seeing such behavior, my father often scolded my sister. However, my sister never listened to him, and they were not on good terms. That's why it made sense that my father wouldn't leave the inheritance to my sister. But my sister was not the type to let that go. Since only the reserved portion was to be inherited by my sister, if it had been her usual self, she would have complained and been angry. However, this time she showed no signs of anger. Anyway, since the will states that Kelly cannot inherit, you have to renounce the inheritance. That can't be. I wanted to deny that my father would say such a thing, but since it was written in the will, I could say nothing. In the end, we proceeded according to my father's will, and the inheritance was passed on to my husband. According to the lawyer, the total amount of the inheritance was $5 million. I was surprised to hear the amount, but it was characteristic of my frugal father. There were parts of the inheritance that I couldn't accept, but I decided to believe that my father had his reasons. After the inheritance, my husband's attitude began to change drastically. "I won't be coming home today." "Ha, that's rare. Where are you going?" "It doesn't matter." My husband coldly brushed me off and left the house. After that, he stopped preparing meals and began staying out 2 to 3 nights a week. After my father passed away, I was grieving, and I couldn't keep up with my husband's sudden change in behavior. A few days later, "Please divorce me." Ben suddenly said such a thing, leaving me speechless and unable to respond. "What? Your sister is pregnant." "That's why I'm asking for a divorce." I couldn't understand at all. It was the first time I heard from Ben that my sister was pregnant, but what does her pregnancy have to do with our divorce? "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean. The child in Sarah's womb is mine. We will raise the child together in this house from now on." His words hit me like a thunderbolt. "What? You've been having an affair? And with my own sister?" "Well, yes, it would be an affair. I'm going to live with Sarah starting today, so Kelly, please leave." "What are you saying? How can I just leave all of a sudden?" Click. Just as I was about to unleash my anger at him with great momentum, the sound of the front door opening interrupted me. With the door opening, a loud "I'm home" could be heard. "I'm home? Didn't Ben tell you? From now on, for the sake of the baby, I want to live in a spacious house. Ben inherited this house, and as his future wife, it's natural for me to live here, right? Sarah, do you even realize what you've done? You're the worst. I can't believe this. It's your fault for having him stolen from you. If you didn't want that to happen, you should have held on to him more." "What?" She showed no remorse, instead mocking and starting to laugh at me. "Stop fighting. Does this man even realize why we're fighting?" Anger was boiling up inside me. "Anyway, Kelly, just leave. If Sarah gets stressed, it's not good for the baby. And I've already filled out the divorce papers, so submit them to the courthouse. Do you realize how selfish you're being?" I shot a sharp look at Ben, who shrugged for a moment, but soon calmed down by looking at my sister. It felt disgusting. Can't help it, right? I've been taking care of your father all this time, and maybe she fell in love with me. Ugh. It's pathetic for an old flame to butt in. Just leave already. The two of them chuckled together. And then Ben demanded divorce. "Sign the papers." Leaving those words behind, he slammed the door shut, and I was thrown out of the house. Ben chose to abandon me and marry my sister. While crushed by grief, I started walking. That day, I contacted my best friend Mia and arranged to stay at her house for a few days. While staying at Mia's place, I searched for a single apartment and signed a contract for it. I told Mia everything that had happened. "I can't believe something like that happened. It's the worst." "But doesn't it seem strange? Would your dad really do that?" "You're right. It might be worth investigating." We decided to request a handwriting analysis. Fortunately, having worked at the same company as my father, there was plenty of material available to identify his handwriting. Also, relying on a contact of Mia's, I decided to hire a lawyer. As we continued to investigate, I grew suspicious of my husband's sister and the lawyer who had opened the will. 1 month later, once all the investigation results were in, I went to the house with a lawyer I knew. "Excuse us. Hey, what are you doing here? You've really done it, haven't you? I see right through you, so let me explain now. Sarah, sit down there." My ex-husband and sister nervously took their seats, and my lawyer and I also sat down. "Let me get straight to the point. We've investigated the will. As a result of our investigation, the will you prepared is invalid." "What?" Their faces turned pale. They knew what they had done. A will needs a signature and a date of creation. Did you know that? That's. Most importantly, this will has been forged. We conducted a handwriting analysis, and it was not written by your father. The lawyer spoke calmly and reliably. "That can't be. You're lying. Stop lying." Suddenly, my ex-husband stood up and started to make a scene. "Hey, calm down." My sister desperately tried to stop him. "Anyway, this will is invalid, so you two will not inherit anything from your father. It's a lie. It must be a lie." Holding his head, my husband Ben crouched down. You really fooled me, huh? I can't believe you forged Dad's will. I've already reported this to the police. The police? Why would the police get involved? Forgery of private documents is a serious crime. Did you really forge it without knowing that? Your head is in the clouds. Stop. I was wrong. Please, forgive me. Ben pressed his forehead to the floor, prostrating himself in front of me. I let out a deep sigh. Forgive you? There's no way I could. You had an affair with my sister and forged a will to try to take the inheritance. You're despicable. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Ding dong. What now? At a time like this, Ben said as he went to the door. And there stood a police officer. The police? Why? Didn't I tell you? I've reported it to the police. No way. My husband retreated. Are you Ben? Is Sarah also here? We need to speak with you at the police station about the forgery of private documents. What the heck? Kelly, do something. Just because of a little forgery, the police. In her panic, my sister inadvertently admitted to her part in the forgery. There's nothing I can do. This is the consequence of your actions. As they argued, the police officer revealed another shocking fact. Additionally, your crimes don't stop there. You hired a friend to act as a fake lawyer, didn't you? Yes, the lawyer who read the will that time was a fake. Apparently, my ex-husband had paid his friend $1,000 to pretend to be a lawyer and promised a share of the inheritance once it was secured. Why would you? That friend has already confessed and has been arrested. That action qualifies as an unauthorized practice of law and fraud. He has testified about your involvement, so we have all the evidence. Damn it, that guy! Visibly upset and agitated, he was kicking chairs and shouting. It was the first time I saw Ben so emotionally unstable, which left me feeling complex. Raging, prostrating, having an affair with my sister, and forging my father's will. The man I believed was my destiny turned out to be a total scoundrel. I once truly loved him. I thought I might feel a bit of sympathy or loneliness watching Ben being arrested, but I felt absolutely none of that. Unbeknownst to me, my affection for Ben had completely faded over the past month. While watching Ben, my sister was breaking down in tears. She had brought it upon herself. Later, my ex-husband and sister were taken to the police station. The two were arrested for forging the will and hiring a friend to provide false testimony. I was thinking about what would happen to my sister's unborn child, but it was no longer my concern. As for me, I became the heir to the estate and inherited $5 million in cash. Through this experience, I learned about the harshness of life and also discovered my own strength. Despite being betrayed and hurt, I had the courage to pursue the truth and was able to achieve justice because of it. As a result of the trial, my ex-husband Ben and my sister Sarah both received actual prison sentences. The charges of forgery and fraud were serious, and both of them were sentenced to several years in prison. I am to become the aunt of my sister's child, but I am not yet ready to face this. Maybe one day, when the child grows up, the day will come when I can tell the truth. Inheriting such a large sum of money has transformed my life. However, through this ordeal, I've learned that there are things more important than money. The courage to pursue the truth, the strength to believe in myself, and the value of true friendship. Without Mia, I would not have been able to overcome this difficulty. I have taken over my father's position at his company. Although there was initial confusion, I now feel a sense of duty to protect and further develop what my father built. The employees have warmly welcomed me. Kelly, you'll be fine. We trust not just because you're the president's daughter, but because of your character and abilities. The employees' words make me feel responsible. Following my father's wishes, I strive daily to protect the happiness of our employees and their families. Although I face difficulties at times, I am confident that I can overcome each one with the strength I gained from this experience. As for love, I've decided to take a break from it. It seems like it will take time to heal my wounded heart, but I believe that one day, I'll have a wonderful encounter. For now, I think it's time for me to face myself and grow. Occasionally on weekends, I visit my parents' graves. Mom, Dad, I'm doing well. As your daughter, I am diligently living each day so as not to bring you shame, I tell them, and I feel at peace. In the future, I want to be someone who can help others. I plan to establish a foundation to support people who are experiencing the kind of suffering I went through. People make mistakes, but they have the power to learn from them and recover, my father often said. I hold these words close to my heart and walk forward. Life can take unexpected turns. But if you live sincerely and stick to your beliefs, I believe happiness will come. My new life has just begun. What meetings and experiences await me may be a little scary, but I'm more excited than anything. Mom, Dad, thank you. Because of your love and teachings, I am here now. As your daughter, I will continue to live proudly. And if I can pass on the lessons I've learned through this experience to someone else someday, that might become my new mission. Tomorrow is another new day. I take a deep breath and step forward into the future. This story may have come to an end, but the story of my life continues.
Can you believe our daughter is coming home and we don't have a room for her? This is troubling. Can you move out this time? I was shocked to hear these words suddenly from my mother-in-law. In the house where I had been living with my husband's family, my mother-in-law labeled me as a bad wife who doesn't do household chores and criticized me daily. Then they wanted to kick me out to make room for my husband's sister who was coming home for childbirth. We can't keep an incompetent person who contributes nothing to the family any longer. Hurry up and leave so we can free up the room. My name is Tracy. I'm a 33-year-old office worker. After graduating from college, I joined a well-known, large company in my hometown, actively working and living the life of a working adult. As a salesperson, I find fulfillment in dealing with various clients and advancing negotiations. I built my career overcoming numerous challenges and became accustomed to my job. That's when I met Nick, who would later become my husband. Nick, 2 years my senior, was the section chief at a client company. We became close through work, gradually sharing personal stories as well as business discussions. I was gradually drawn to Nick's sincere and kind nature. Apparently, he was attracted to my serious approach to work. It was embarrassing but also very pleasing to hear this later. Our relationship naturally evolved into a romance, and we got married when I turned 30. We rented an apartment in an area with good access to both of our workplaces and started our married life. After marriage, I was promoted to a managerial position, leading a satisfying life both at work and personally. However, there was one concern: my mother-in-law's occasional visits. She, having devoted herself to homemaking from a young age, believes that a daughter-in-law should perfectly handle household chores. Tracy, you've left some dishes unwashed again. And look at all these piled up laundry. You're so sloppy. What kind of upbringing did you have? My mother-in-law would say these harsh words whenever she found the opportunity during her weekend visits. I planned to clean up that day, but the atmosphere didn't allow for any rebuttal, and all I could say was, "I'm sorry." In reality, I've always focused on my career and was not good at housework. Therefore, my inability to handle household chores made her look down on me as incompetent. When I was single, I rarely cooked and usually did all the cleaning and laundry on my weekends. After marriage, to reduce the burden of household chores, I invested in home appliances like cleaning robots. Nick understands my personality and doesn't force me to do household chores. On the contrary, I'm truly grateful to him for cooking dinner and doing laundry when he returns home earlier than me. Mom, Tracy is working hard every day and doesn't have much time. Please don't complain. Nick would defend me whenever his mother said something, but she would just get upset without listening. Oh, that reminds me, Nick. Our finances are a bit tight this month. Can you send a little more money home? Suddenly, my previously upset mother-in-law would start making brazen demands with a smile. I sighed inwardly, thinking, not again, and resigned myself to the situation. There are many family members living in the house where my parents-in-law reside. Currently, Nick's parents, brother, and grandparents are living there. Until a while ago, Nick's sister, Lauren, lived with them and contributed to the household expenses by working, but recently she got married and left the house. As a result, only my father-in-law and brother-in-law were working after that, leading to a decrease in household income, and they came to struggle financially. In reality, their income was lower than that of our household. Nick started to provide financial support to his parents' home, but his mother frequently visited us, demanding more money. I think it was okay to refuse considering our own household budget, but Nick couldn't ignore his family's suffering. After some hesitation, Nick agreed to her demands. Okay, I'll send a bit more. That's my Nick. Unlike someone else, you understand. My mother-in-law was satisfied with his answer and gave me a glance. I felt dissatisfied but didn't argue back. I wanted to move away from my husband's family, but our home was convenient for commuting, and it was hard to suggest moving considering his situation. However, our lives changed afterward. There was an issue with the care of Nick's grandparents, who lived in the family home. Originally, my mother-in-law and Lauren were in charge of the care, but ever since Lauren left, Nick's mother's burden increased. It seemed that my father-in-law and brother-in-law left the care to the women and hardly helped. After discussing with Nick, we decided to live together with his family. As we didn't have children, I agreed to this decision but set one condition for Nick. I wanted to continue focusing on my job instead of using my salary for household expenses. I strongly wanted to keep my job and had no intention of quitting. When I expressed my intention, Nick agreed. Of course, you don't have to quit your job. I don't want to involve you in my family's problems. But I'm sorry it turned out this way. Nick said apologetically. Indeed, living together might increase my mother-in-law's sarcasm. This was my only concern, but we decided to start living with his family, with me continuing my job to support the household and Nick mainly handling caregiving and housework. However, when we started living together, his family wasn't pleased with our arrangement. It's absurd for Nick to do caregiving and housework. That's the wife's role, said my mother-in-law. It was a response I had partially anticipated, but I wondered why such roles had to be fixed. My parents-in-law and brother-in-law insisted that housework and caregiving were the wife's job and didn't change their opinion. So, they ordered me to reduce my working hours or quit. However, if I were to comply, our income would decrease and we would continue to struggle financially. To support a family of 7, I need to work full-time. I will continue working as a regular employee, I explained and stood my ground. However, my in-laws remained unsatisfied and deepened their displeasure of me. How can someone have such an opinion? I can't believe how disobedient this daughter-in-law is. My mother-in-law exclaimed angrily, and her attitude toward me became even harsher. Afterward, my brother-in-law also criticized me, using work as an excuse not to help mom. What an incompetent wife. Then, both of them began leading the bullying against me. My father-in-law barely intervened and didn't protect me. Nick's grandparents, who returned to their bedroom immediately after dinner, had limited contact with me and showed little interest in me. After starting to live with my in-laws, my work became busier, and I often returned home late. When I came home after overtime, the family complained that I should come home earlier, looking down on me as if my job was insignificant. I felt deeply frustrated when they belittled my work. I took pride in my job and was committed to my responsibilities as a manager. However, my in-laws kept telling me to prioritize housework over my job, and eventually, I found more peace at work than at my in-laws' house. Once, unable to bear the bullying, I complained to Nick. Why am I treated like this despite earning the daily expenses and even paying for new furniture and appliances for your family's house? Nick listened to me seriously. He understood the problems his family would face if I were to quit my job. I'll talk to everyone. I'm really sorry for involving you in my family's issues, Nick said, and I was filled with gratitude. He must be tired from doing housework and caregiving after work. Later, Nick tried to discuss it with his whole family, but their opinions didn't change at all. My brother-in-law even angrily accused me. You didn't discipline your wife properly, and that's why she has become so selfish. It's your responsibility to train her. My in-laws agreed with him, and their criticism toward us began. I had had enough. The attitude of Nick's own family, who once received financial support from him, was unbearable. Sorry, Nick. I can't live here anymore. We discussed our future seriously in our room. Nick, too, was angry at his family's response and immediately decided we should end this living arrangement and move out soon. If we were to continue like that, our stress would only increase. Therefore, Nick and I decided to leave the house, began searching for a new residence, and started preparing for our next life, keeping it a secret from his family. Half a month later, on an afternoon, Lauren, my sister-in-law who had left the family home after getting married, returned unexpectedly. It was during the weekend and I was off work, so all of us, including Nick's family, were at home. Seeing Lauren return with a large suitcase, my mother-in-law was overjoyed. "Lauren, welcome back. Have you had lunch yet? If not, I'll make something right away." "Thanks, Mom. I'm really hungry." Lauren passed by Nick and I without greeting us and headed straight to the living room. "Hold on a second. Lauren, why did you come back all of a sudden?" Nick asked as he entered the living room. Lauren replied, "I'm about to have a baby soon. It's my first time, and I feel insecure, so I've decided to come back home for the childbirth. I'll be staying here for a while." My father-in-law and brother-in-law who were watching TV in the living room also seemed to welcome Lauren's return. However, Nick and I were confused. This was because the room Lauren used to use was being used by us then. Indeed, the family home was spacious, but at that time it housed 7 people, and there were no vacant rooms. Before I could say anything, my mother-in-law looked at me and sighed dramatically. "What a predicament. Lauren is back, but we're short of rooms. Tracy, could you leave now that we have this situation?" "Huh?" It took me a moment to grasp the intention behind her words. "Well, the room you're using originally belonged to Lauren, right? Now that Lauren is back, it's only proper to give it back to her," my mother-in-law stated clearly. Then she laughed and said, "We can't keep a useless person who doesn't help with anything around the house here, can't we?" While seeking agreement from the other family members, my father-in-law nodded and my brother-in-law looked at me and laughed. "Wait a minute, isn't that unreasonable?" Nick argued while I was still in shock. Lauren then haughtily said to me, "You're a wife, yet you don't properly take care of the house. There's no point in you being here, just leave already." However, I was the one supporting most of the household expenses. What would happen to this house if I were to leave? Did they even understand that? Hesitating to voice this out, Nick placed his hand on my shoulder and shook his head in resignation. "It's okay. Let's leave this house together." Nick's words were filled with determination, and he seemed more reliable and strong than ever. We had already planned to end our cohabitation in the near future, so we made the decision sooner. "Understood. Then we will leave right away." At my response, the entire family burst into laughter. Anger welled up in me toward them, who neither held back Nick, who had been supporting them with housework and caregiving, nor did anything else to help him but laugh. The thought of unpleasant people leaving clears my heart. "When you leave, make sure to take away all your belongings," my mother-in-law declared, so I quietly nodded. We immediately arranged for a moving company and left the family home with Nick that day. The next day, while temporarily staying at a hotel, we received a call from my mother-in-law. It was surprising that my mother-in-law called my cell phone instead of Nick's, but since I had an idea why, I decided to answer. As soon as I picked up, my mother-in-law's angry voice came through. "What's the meaning of this? Today, the movers came and took almost all the furniture and appliances from the house. You arranged it, didn't you?" As I was accused, I simply shrugged in resignation and thought, just as I expected. Nick, who was nearby, seemed to hear her voice as well and gave a wry smile. The movers I had arranged the day before took away all the household goods, including furniture and appliances. Among them were large items like the dining table and TV, and with most things gone, the family was in complete chaos. "I just followed your instructions to take away all my belongings. Everything that was taken was purchased by me. That's why I disposed of them," I replied, and my mother-in-law was at a loss for words. The furniture and appliances that were newly purchased when we started living with them were all actually paid by me. As I asserted they were my personal belongings, my mother-in-law squeezed out a frustrated response. I did say take them away, but this is too much. How are we supposed to live in a house with nothing? She exclaimed angrily, to which I calmly replied, now that we no longer live together, it's no longer my concern. It must be nice to have a spacious house now that the unpleasant people are gone. I firmly said this, ignored my still complaining mother-in-law, and hung up the phone. I thought she would call back soon, but surprisingly, there was no further call from her. Afterward, Nick and I began a new life in our new home. The furniture and appliances retrieved from the family home were still in good condition, so we moved them into our new place. We spent some peaceful days, but about a month later, we suddenly started receiving frequent calls from the family. Wondering why they were contacting us then, I considered blocking the calls, but I hesitated because there was something I wanted to tell them. Busy with work and unable to answer the phone, I came home one day to find a missed call from my mother-in-law. Nick was still at work, having to work overtime, and was not home yet. When I responded to the call, my mother-in-law's irritated voice echoed, "You finally picked up. What do you need?" I asked, and she hurriedly commanded, "Life has become difficult since you two left. Come back home." Apparently, various payments had started to fall behind after we left. Before living together, the family home underwent extensive barrier-free renovations for the grandparents, and there was still a considerable loan to pay. Nick was paying that loan when we lived together with his family. Additionally, the money I earned was used for purchasing furniture, appliances, and monthly household expenses. But after our departure, they struggled to repay the loan and manage the household finances. The monthly living expenses I paid amounted to about $4,300. The family, who had depended on our income and spent recklessly, had no savings. Unable to cover over $4,000 of monthly expenses, they became desperate and asked us to return. I was just appalled by such a selfish request. This is the result of you driving out two earners. We have already started a new life and have no plans to return. I refused clearly. However, my mother-in-law was unyielding, saying, "How dare you? This won't do. Put Nick on the phone. Nick is still at work and hasn't returned yet. Actually, we moved to a high-rise condo. We are now living comfortably and peacefully, so we cannot fulfill your unreasonable request," I explained, to which my mother-in-law seemed surprised. Nick and I were secretly searching for a new residence when we were living with his family, and after finding the high-rise condo that met our ideal conditions, we were able to move immediately after being ousted from the family home. Does this mean you're leaving us behind? My mother-in-law accused us with a tearful voice. You have no right to criticize us when you did nothing but depend on our earnings and spent money recklessly. Please don't interfere in our lives anymore, I stated firmly. As soon as I finished speaking, I ended the call without waiting for my mother-in-law's response. I was relieved to have informed them about our move to the high-rise condo and proceeded to block all contacts from his family. This new home was something we had earned with our hard work. We wanted to make a clear statement to his family, who had irresponsibly relied on us while constantly complaining and living leisurely. When Nick came home, I told him about the call from his mother. He had also received multiple calls on his cell phone but was unsure how to respond. I thought I couldn't abandon them because they are family, but I'm tired of dealing with them, Nick said, looking disheartened. He too seemed exhausted from his family's constant dependence. Subsequently, we changed our smartphone numbers and completely cut off contact with his family. Since we only told my mother-in-law that we were living in a high-rise condo, they wouldn't know our exact address. Afterward, Nick and I enjoyed peaceful days together, busy with our managerial roles but feeling fulfilled in our daily lives. 3 years passed, and Nick and I decided to check on his family's well-being after a long time. Since leaving the family home, Nick had not visited even during Thanksgiving or Christmas, so we had no idea how they were living. Upon arriving at the family home, we found no sign of Nick's family. The house was up for sale, and complete strangers were living there, Strange, where could everyone have gone? Nick wondered aloud. Encountering a friend of my mother-in-law who lived nearby, we decided to inquire about their recent circumstances. The events that unfolded at the family home over the 3 years then came to light. Lauren had returned for childbirth, claiming it was temporary, but in reality, she was already divorced and continued to live in the family home even after giving birth. Despite our departure, the addition of family members put further strain on the household finances. My mother-in-law began working part-time, and Lauren soon put her child in daycare to start working, but their nights were filled with household chores and caregiving for the grandparents. The exhaustion from adding child care to their already busy lives was understandably unimaginable. Moreover, Nick's grandparents stopped going out in order to save money, but they both eventually developed dementia. My mother-in-law had no choice but to quit her job to focus on caregiving, but even with Lauren's help, there was a limit to what amateurs could do. Unable to withstand the situation, they quickly appealed to my father-in-law to move the grandparents to a facility. But my father-in-law and brother-in-law refused to listen to them. They were relying on the grandparents' pension and were reluctant to spend on facility costs. As a result, the family's opinions were divided. I can't stand this life anymore. I've reached my limit. Nick's mother cried out in agony and left the house with Lauren and her grandchild. Left alone, my father-in-law and brother-in-law couldn't take care of the dementia-ridden grandparents, and despite hiring helpers, they soon reached their limit. Eventually, they decided to place the grandparents in a facility, but by then, the family had fallen apart and no one returned home. Struggling to pay off the renovation loan, my father-in-law and brother-in-law ended up selling the house and moved elsewhere after paying off the loan. Hearing these stories, Nick showed a sad expression filled with mixed emotions. We asked the neighbors for the name of the facility where his grandparents were staying and decided to visit them soon. A few days later, a neighbor contacted Nick, relaying a message from my mother-in-law. Apparently, she had learned about our visit to the family home. According to her, my father-in-law and brother-in-law were living together and were paying for the grandparents' facility costs, but they seldom visited them. My mother-in-law herself was living with Lauren and her grandchild, working part-time and still struggling with life. I can't stand this life anymore. Please, let us live in a high-rise condo, too. The neighbor conveyed her plea. Hearing such a request, we were just astonished. Nick, too, had grown wary of his family and stopped contacting the neighbor afterward. I don't intend to involve myself with my family anymore, but I do want to keep an eye on Grandpa and Grandma until the end, he said. I agreed with his decision and supported him, focusing more on our work than ever, especially when Nick occasionally felt the loneliness of losing his family. Having overcome difficult times, we want to live even more happily from now on. We plan to cherish our current life, live peacefully, and consider having children in the future.